I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with you all. I think the whole hiring and interviewing process and everything that goes with it can be so intimidating and often frustrating. And so it's often hard to have someone be able to give you some help or advice behind the scenes. So I'm going to cover some content and hopefully some things that can help you out along the way. With that in mind, I just wanted to go ahead and what I'm thinking that I'm going to cover today, at least to get started. And really for that, it's a little bit about resumes and some tips around building those and what to include. That you could have hours just on that topic alone, but we'll dig into that a little bit and give you hopefully some insight there. And then preparing for an interview and really the whole interview process and how to do that successfully from beginning to end. So as the kind of the description of this session said, an interview really isn't just the time you're in front of that person who's doing the hiring, but there's a whole lot that goes into making it successful. And so really want to make sure that you're thinking about that whole cliche of, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And interviewing is that cliche. So it's a chance to really to understand it and do it at your best. And there are some tips and tricks that hopefully can help you out along the way. So I think the first thing I would share with you is just in general, interviewing is a skill. It is not natural. It is something that if you practice and you prepare, and it will build your confidence. It will make it easier, and typically winging it doesn't end up successfully. So know that if you go into it with that mindset, the same as you do a lot of other things, it's going to help you to be more successful in the process. So as we talk through things today, I think thinking about success in interviews, it's really about that preparations, and we'll talk about what you can do to prepare and be best prepared as you step into that. And then qualifying. So, and I want to put an asterisk next to that, because being qualified for a job doesn't mean that I've had that job title before or even that specific experience, but you have the skills and the abilities and how to articulate that. But also understanding that when you look at a job and you're not qualified, understanding that too, so that you're setting yourself up with the right expectations. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then what's your strategy? How do you have a strategy to be successful? The same as you do, the career choices you've made and other things you do in your life, and that strategy is around if you're prepared with those examples of when you've done things, when you've been successful, putting those skills to use and being able to articulate them, that is so key. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that piece of it later and how to set yourself up for success there. And then I can't tell you enough how important it is when you have the opportunity to practice. So, again, it's back to that, making it natural and practicing for an interview, whether that be asking people to mock interview you, doing informational interviews, if you have any resources that you can network with to allow you to not just go into it cold, do a lot of interviewing. Those are the things that will help you build confidence, and that confidence is really going to come through in how you are able to present and articulate what you can do for that person and for that role and for that company. So, starting with the resume piece of it, and again, this is something you could spend a lot of time on, and I'll go into more detail on a few of these things, but it's really important when you think about a resume to think about, what you need to do to make it your best. And instead of letting it intimidate you, take the time and just brainstorm on paper a self-assessment of all the things you've done or you're capable of, you have the ability to do, skills you have. And when you're doing that, it's work experience, but don't forget all the other things that go into that: community service, volunteer work, your WIN membership, anything you've done within the organization that sets you apart, in addition to just being a member. All of those things share more of your story and tell more about you. And you want to talk about those skills and abilities in a way that shares your success and that illustrates your strengths. And what I mean by that is, and I can share more, but really the idea of when you think about your resume, it is your one your glance down as a recruiter, one-page advertisement, what pops, what makes somebody look at that and think I want to learn more, or they have potential. And so I always give the example, if you are, if one of your experiences, which is a great one and should always be included on a resume, is a server in a restaurant. No matter what job you're doing, the transferable skills and the things you do there are great. But when I see server in a restaurant, the bullet below it shouldn't be things like serve food, take care of customers, because I kind of know what a server does, right? How do I set myself apart? So instead of that, was I asked to train other employees? Was I employee of the month? Was I recognized for something specific like customer service? Did I win a contest for add-on sales? Think of those things that set me apart. And that's how you want to talk about it. So those success stories, those accomplishments and results are a good way to think about how you describe the roles you've had. And to go into a little bit more detail on that, as you think about your experience, again, whether it's academic and your schoolwork, your volunteer, your leadership, in addition to the work experiences, how do you summarize that? How do you take that and put it into a way that recruiter on the other end, looking at that piece of paper or on that thing on the screen, is going to learn more about you? So, and think about what's relevant. So I just gave you one example, things like, retail or service industry jobs, even, coaching, lifeguarding, all of those things that sometimes when people think it's my professional resume, those don't count. Those all count because they teach you those transferable skills I'm going to talk about here in a second, and they give you the ability to really share those. In addition, all of those volunteer activities, things like your WIN membership and the things that you're doing outside of work or school, those also give you that transferable experience. I've already talked about how to make them action and accomplishment oriented. Really key as you think through, as you go to share something, is what does it mean? How does it set me apart? And then most importantly, I really want to speak to this transferable skills piece, because I think it's where most people get caught up, especially if you don't have a lot of what you'd consider relevant work experience or specific experience to that job you want. So when you think about what you've done in your life and what you do each day, you have a lot of things that transfer to what that employer is looking for. So how do we translate that and give those examples of work in a way that makes people understand it? So, it could be that you were a lifeguard, and as a lifeguard, how does that transfer into what I do here? Well, there's problem solving, there's delegation, there's the ability to understand difficult situations. You have a parent who's unhappy with how things are being handled and you have to deal with them. I talked about a server, if you were working in retail, do you have that? Have you had to get a team on board to meet a sales goal, or work together to accomplish a task within a volunteer organization or as part of a committee, or as a school project and a group project? So think about and we're going to talk about when you look at that job, what are the skills somebody's looking for? If they're looking for problem solving, how have you done that? Even if it wasn't in your job description or even in a work experience, how can you talk about your ability to organize? So there's a lot of skills that are transferable, and they're not just even these, but even things like sales ability, empathy, which ties to customer service. So I think the key is don't underestimate anything that you've done as not being important to your future, because it sometimes isn't. It may not match up word for word, but it's there. And how can we talk about that? So we'll dig in a little bit more to that. But again, I think from a resume perspective, it is your one page, and it's right here, not too long, not too short. Especially if you're early in your career, I highly recommend you can fit your resume on one piece of paper, on one page on a screen. And that's important because, again, if you're especially in roles that are early on where there might be good big candidate pools for us to consider, how do you stand out quickly? And how do you make sure that you put your best information out there first? So as you're writing that resume, think about what's most important and most impactful and make that first. There's no right or wrong as to whether that's your education, your volunteer experience, your work experience, or a combination. But you want to put the things that are going to show the most at the top, because that's where our eyes are going to go, and that's what we're going to catch first. But some other tips, again, are obviously spell check. As much as we might say that and it seems like common sense, it's probably the biggest thing that we see on the recruiting side are grammar or spelling errors within a resume. The reality check is, don't rely on yourself, because you could use the spell check feature a million times and it still won't catch everything. You can read it over just as many times, but you've been looking at it so much you don't see it. So make sure you're sharing it with others and having that second or third set of eyes on it before you share it out to potential employers. And again, I know that sounds like common sense, but it is probably the biggest mistake that we see. And then formatting, I put that on here because today, as you know, most of the things you're doing is applying online. You're sharing or scanning resumes, you're putting them into an online format versus when you finally get to hand someone one in person, which is even less right now. So when it's going into a system, it's really important that that format is simple. Basic is okay. You don't need a lot of bells and whistles. It's more about the content and that it's clean and clear and professional, and not necessarily that it's fancy or has a lot of different, different fonts and different underlines and things that can actually hurt you when it gets scanned into a system, which a lot of us do. And you probably, if you've applied for any job, have been a part of. So be thinking about that. If you're in something creative where you want that creativity to come out, maybe share that as a separate document and let someone know that it's not that it needs to be viewed in a certain way, so that you don't lose that. But really, from a resume perspective, simple is good. Keywords are key. So again, same thing. A lot of us and a lot of companies and organizations, as they're hiring now, use systems and tools to help either find you through all the people out there if they're going to search for you, or when you submit a resume and submit an application, they're looking for the match to the keywords that are important to them. So those transferable skills in that list that I had there, whether that be problem solving, teamwork, certain technical skills that you're going to get within your education, make sure if those are important to that job and they're part of that job description and what they're looking for, that those keywords are part of the resume you're submitting, because the more of those that match, the higher up the list you go as far as someone seeing your resume first. So just be thinking about that and make sure you're including those relevant keywords, leadership, organization, manage, different things that float to the top. But also make sure they're genuine. So don't put things in there that you want to do that you aren't able to do. So, when push comes to shove, you have to be able to deliver on whatever you put on that resume. And then in the multiple version thing, that sounds strange, I know, but it's so easy now to be able to kind of customize when necessary. So if there's a specific role you want and there are things that are important in this job versus this job, customize a version of your resume that you submit to really bring those things to the top. So, obviously, you don't need to have 100 different versions, but if you're looking at, jobs that might be retail focused versus, technical focused, you want to share different things, because what's important for that hiring manager or that recruiter is going to look a little different. And then something not on here, but I think goes without saying, and could be, again, another topic in and of itself, is once you do all of this with your resume, make sure you have it out there. Make sure it's viewable. Whether that's getting it onto job boards or sites where recruiters are going to look, like LinkedIn or Indeed, or a lot of the niche sites that could be, applicable to the profession you're going into. But are there other relevant websites, your industry association? Does WIN have a way for you to network your resume? Do you have people in different organizations or companies that you're interested in that you can share it with? So think of how you network yourself. Once you've built this advertisement, how do you get it in front of the right audience? Again, a whole nother topic, but we could spend a lot of time on, but important to be thinking about once you get it done. So switching gears, and now we've got that resume now, and we have the opportunity to interview. how do we prepare ourselves and set ourselves up for that? So I'd say the first things you want to do is before you ever get in front of someone to actually interview is, and even maybe even apply for the job, is to do some homework. And it starts with, if you're prepared for the interview, again, it's back to being more confident, hopefully less nervous. And when that happens and you're prepared, that's going to raise your level of enthusiasm. That's going to come across in the way you communicate. So again, it helps you to be prepared. And that can be done first by know the company you're interviewing with, the organization, dig in a little. You can do that so easily today. There's so many resources available for you to go out and find out more about that organization, whether it be their own website, articles, publications, LinkedIn, other tools like it, Indeed, where you have a lot of information, even Glassdoor and those review sites that allow you to learn more about an organization and put it all in context as to where it comes from. But there's a lot of ways to do your homework and know a bit more about the company, and beyond just the company, the people within it. If you know who you might be interviewing with or who might be the hiring managers, look them up on LinkedIn, learn a little bit more about them. You can see their career path. Where did they start? Learn a little bit about what they do each day or how they describe their job. So the more you can learn about where you're going and who you're going to be talking to, the more prepared you're going to be. Think about things that if this was my company, what's important to me? And that might be, the culture or the training programs for growth. Maybe it's the way, the way that they approach their purpose in their business. And then you want to do your research on yourself as well. So, that means just spending a little time on you. And we'll talk about that in a second. In fact, I think I have a slide for it. So, when you look at that resume, what are the skills that and strengths and the values you bring, and what are your weaknesses? Know those and be prepared and self-aware, so you're prepared when that might come up in the process. And spending that time kind of doing your research on you, taking that resume and breaking it down, so not for what you're going to share externally, but so you're more prepared to have those conversations. And then we're going to talk about the way you interview and a way that I recommend being prepared and how interviews come along a lot today, which is called behavioral interviewing. Doing this homework on yourself will make you better prepared to answer those questions. And we'll cover that in just a few minutes. But, it's also important that you understand what your goals are in your career, so that you can think about that and where you see yourself, things you want to accomplish, things you want to learn, people you want to work with, places you want to work. So those are all important too. It's the idea of knowing your resume. And then, you'll also have the opportunity, before I get into this piece, of that job description. So if you think about the companies that you're interviewing with, read through that job description and look for those keywords. Look for those things they say are critical, are most important. And not just in the qualifications, which are one piece, but also in the way they describe the job, the responsibilities, the ideal candidate. That's what you want to focus on. So as you get that preparation done, and now you're actually getting ready to do an interview, I think, again, back to that first impression piece, portraying a professional image, whether it's on screen in a video interview, in person, and hopefully we get to do that again, or we get to do it sometimes going forward. But no matter what the role, whether it be a behind the scenes, a technical role, an operational role, no matter what, you always want to portray a professional image. And by that, I mean, being neat and organized, making sure that you're showing your best self. And that's your clothing. It's making sure your hair is done, whatever that is. But and I say that because this person is looking at you thinking, if this is their best day, what am I going to get on a different day, right? So, but more importantly, I say it, what's your statement? What I want is for when you leave that interview, what you want them to remember about you is your abilities, your capabilities, your interests, your ability to communicate and articulate what you can do and what you bring to the table. And you don't want those distractions. So, as a recruiter, it's a selection process. So, it starts with, how do I remember all these people that I talk to, and what do I remember most about them? Make your content stand out, your abilities stand out. And that's going to, by just making sure that you're professional and you take those kinds of things off the table, you're more likely to stand out in the best way possible. And then, didn't change. And then, it's just some ideas of some things to think about as you prepare for your interview. And some of these are goofy and some might seem a little common sense, but I actually grabbed a bunch of our recruiters and we talked about some of the things that we think float to the top if we could give some advice. So I'm going to share them with you and just give you a few things to think about. I talked about practice already. Always be early. Nothing's ever going to be wrong with that. Now, you don't want to be necessarily a half an hour early where somebody's not expecting you yet, but you want to, be thoughtful. And if you are, hang out and wait, but know you're prepared and use that time to prepare. Remember to smile, even if you're, as you're speaking, or even if it's on the phone or if it's on video, that's going to just engage you more. It's going to show enthusiasm. It's going to help you come across in a more confident way. The same thing as your posture. So, be thinking about those things. And that's where the practice comes in. If you're sitting and you might be able to do it right now, but if you're sitting and you're kind of up on the front of your chair and you're talking, it immediately makes you more engaged. If you're sitting kind of back and leaning back, it immediately, the perception is you're less engaged or maybe less interested. So just think about some of those little things in your nonverbals, even in this COVID world where we might not be face-to-face in person, they still come across and might be even more important. And then we're going to talk about accentuating the positive, but that's another big deal. Some of the don'ts, again, I know some of these are silly, but they actually do come into play. Don't talk too much. Think about, being concise, getting your point across, being able to articulate what's being asked, and know that if there's a question, they can always dig in more. But be careful and that's where part of that preparation comes in, is if you speak and you communicate in a more linear fashion, it's easier for people to understand what you're capable of and what you're able to do. So be careful to think about, am I just talking because I'm nervous, or am I actually still getting my point across? Anything that can be a distraction in the interview, if you have your phone, like triple check it or just shut it off completely for the time that you're in there. Definitely don't want to be like, oh, hold on, let me check my phone. And I know that there's going to be somebody that says, well, my recruiter did that, which is also not good. But, that doesn't mean we should do it too, right? So I completely appreciate that sometimes we need to walk the walk. So, but those are those distractions, looking at your watch or at a clock, that make it look like, what's the perception? Am I actually interested in this? Think about your language and how you articulate things. And even when it's a casual situation, which we try, I know our recruiters are great about making you feel comfortable, which is what we want to do, because we want to really learn and get to know you. But that doesn't mean get so comfortable that you forget kind of the professionalism that goes along with it. So always keep that in the back of your mind. And then I add this last don't, because this one's really big, if you ask me. And that is, the idea that never assume that anyone you meet is unimportant. So you might be going into an interview and if you're in person and there's a receptionist there, I can give you multiple examples in my own experiences where that receptionist has been able to share with me that the person I met wasn't who they saw. They were rude to them, or they were, inappropriate on the phone in the waiting room while they waited, or, how did they treat people? Or on the other end of it, someone might walk by you and say hello. How you say it, what you do next, you never know who you're talking to. I had someone interviewing and they were waiting in the waiting area, and our vice president and general manager is who walked by to say hello, and the person kind of looked up, said hi, kind of went back to their phone. What I got back as feedback is that general manager walking into my office and saying, I don't see that person in front of my customers. So you never know. So always be thoughtful around who's involved in the process, and just as you would want that respect, show that as well. Now, if we're talking about the interview itself, I'm going to talk through these in detail, so I'm just going to make sure to kind of cover them. But there's a lot to it. So the first is making a good first impression. So again, I talked about the smile. Be conscious of both your verbal and your nonverbal communication, and some of the things that I already spoke about. You know, your animation. Obviously, you see I talk with my hands a lot. It's a little distracting. I try to sit on them if I can help it, but it also helps to help somebody understand what I'm talking about is exciting or that I'm interested in. I'm showing enthusiasm. So, you know, presentation is part of it, and that's your vocabulary, but also your inflection in your voice. And again, practice will help you with that. More important is when you get into the actual content of what you're talking about, know that, again, this is a selection process. So recruiters aren't out to be mean or find things wrong with you, but they are looking at how do I narrow it down. And so, some of the things we want to find out are, where do you have areas of opportunity? No one's perfect. How do you handle when something doesn't go right? And so you're going to get questions like a weakness, or a time you didn't get the sale, or you didn't complete a task. And how do you handle something like that, where it's not necessarily your positive, and turn it into one? So I think a couple of things to think about is the focus on improvements. What did you do to get better? What did you learn from the experience, and how did you grow? Show that growth and development. Focus on things and not people. So if it was a job that you didn't like as well, that they ask about, or if it was really, instead of focusing on a specific person there, talk more about the culture or about the things around you. That self-awareness and understanding when I didn't do something right, or where I made a mistake and what I learned from it, is something that all of us want to know we have, and we want to see in someone. But keep it authentic, but always try to find a positive way to share your story. So it's okay to have a weakness. Just be able to share that you've identified it, you're aware of it, and what you've done to try to improve upon that, or to develop and grow from that. And then this title is wrong. This one is actually to talk about behavioral interviewing. So I mentioned this earlier. So the idea of behavioral interviewing is really simple. It's the idea that from a recruiting perspective, in an interview situation, the best way for us to understand what you're able to do is to look at what your past performance was as your best predictor of your future performance. So, that's, in theory, it's really the idea that, if your past performance was that you were not able to take care of customers, or that you weren't, customer service oriented, then that means maybe in the future, that's what we would expect from you. So I want to explain it this way, because I think the key to behavioral interviewing is, even if you don't get asked a question in a behavioral way, it's a great way to answer them. And it's also a good way to use those transferable skills, because especially if you're early in your career, when someone asks you if it's a given ability where you've had to, say you're in a sales interview, or I've had to sell a product, a service, or an idea. I might not ever have had a sales job, but what have I done in the past that shows I have the ability to sell an idea or a service? And if you use behavioral interviewing, then you can prove you know how to do it. So to give you an example there, behavioral interviews are really about a specific, tell me about a time when something happened. Give me an example of. So give me an example of a time when you had to deal with a difficult customer, and what was the outcome. Tell me about a time when you had to lead a group or a project, and what was the result. So if you hear how I'm saying that, it's a specific. It's not about what I would typically do, how would I typically do this, but it's really very specific. And the reason for that is, when you're talking about specifics, it shows that you actually know how to do it. It gives someone something to see or hear that shows you've done it in the past, and you understand what they're asking. So instead of, if I'm recruiting for sales and I say, so are you good at sales? You're going to say yes. That doesn't tell me anything, right? If I'm a good recruiter, I'm going to say, give me an example of a time you successfully sold something, a product, a service, or an idea. And you are able to say, in my work with my nonprofit that I sit on and work with as a volunteer, we had to build capacity for more clients. And to do that, we needed to raise money. Here's how I did it. So it's specifics, it's examples, it gives you the result. And to kind of put that into something maybe that makes it easier to understand, we call this the STAR method. So when you're thinking about how to answer a question, even if they don't ask you for a specific, I find that this is a great way to answer the question. So identify a situation. So this S in STAR is situation. Identify what's the situation that you want to talk about, the problem you solved, or what you encountered. What is the example you want to give? And then, what were the tasks you did that you needed to do to solve that? So, and then, what was my action? How did you do it? What did you learn? And then the results. What were the results? Was the results that I saved the company money? I made more money. I was recognized. Our team was successful. I took care of a customer. So I'm going to give you an example so that I can kind of give you a way to kind of visualize this really quickly. So in that question I asked earlier, give me an example of a time where you had to deal with a difficult customer. So if I'm identifying that situation, I want to identify a specific time where I know I had a difficult customer. But in the back of my mind, remember, I want one that has a good result. That R is really important. I can't tell you how many times somebody will go down the path of giving me an example with lots of detail and really specific. And then at the end, the customer is still angry and nothing was resolved. So that doesn't really tell me that you're going to be able to take care of my customer. So that's where the practice comes in. So if I want a difficult customer, I had a customer who came in and their license was expired, but they wanted to rent a car. And when I shared that with them, they got really angry and asked to speak to a manager. So, and I'm giving you this example as to how I would tell it very specifically. This situation, this is what happened. Here was my action. I let the customer know that, I'm sure we can find a way to resolve this. Do you have a local, a license from a local state? If so, I would be happy to take you. I know that you don't have a car and we can't get you one right now. I'd be happy to take you to the local driver's license branch and allow you to get it renewed. And I can wait for you. Or I can take you home and once we have that resolved, I can arrange to make sure we can get you a car right away. Come up with the solution so that customer was then happy in the end. And there's a lot of different ways. It's not just about customers. It might be about flexibility or work ethic. And when you had to go above and beyond your typical day's job duties to help the business or to get through the day or to take care of something. So really it's the idea of thinking of specifics. And again, we can do whole workshops just on behavioral interviewing alone. But if you think about those things that are important that they may be asking you about, that were in that job description, that were in, that they're going to identify, prepare for the interview by thinking of situations or specific examples of where you've done those things. And again, it doesn't have to all be work experience. And then be prepared to share those. And then once you get through all of that, you have to kind of close the interview. And I can't tell you how important it is to make sure that you're prepared to close the interview by having questions available. And, I think some people think, well, I don't want to just be fake and make up questions. You shouldn't. So what are the things you really want to know before you walk out of that interview? And, do you completely understand the position? Do you know what the job duties entail? What are the expectations for performance? But there also could be things like, what has been your role in the company? Why are you here? What do you like most? It could be, how do you motivate or prepare your employees for success? What do you do how will I be trained? What's your plan for my development? So think about the things that are important to you, but write them down. There's nothing wrong with referring to a list of questions. And in fact, I recommend it because again, interviewing is a situation where sometimes you're, nervous. I would be, I think you would be too. So instead of being like, oh, I had that question, what was it? Write it down, have it ready, and let someone know, you know what, you already answered a couple of my questions about this or this, because then they know you prepared, even if you don't need to ask the question again. But be prepared with some questions and things you really want to know before you make a decision. And that understanding the position is really important because to me, As I like to say, you go into this, and especially if you want this job, you look at it as like, I have to, I'm interviewing to get this job, but don't forget, you're also interviewing this company and the people within it. So it's a two-way street, because what you're recognizing in the process is this really what I wanted? Will I be successful at it? Do I fit into this culture? Do I relate to the people I'm interviewing with? Those are all important too. So keep those in the back of your mind and know that it's okay for sometimes you to recognize that maybe this isn't the job for you or the organization for you for whatever reason. So when I share this last piece, the close is really, this is a sales process. So express your interest in the position. If you want to move on to the next step, if you are interested in continuing, make sure you end that interviewing by stating that clearly to the person you're interviewing with, why you're interested, why you feel you're the best person, but share with them that just like you're closing a sale, this is why, I am interested in the position. I would look forward to working with you. Here is why I will be a great candidate for this role. Share that and really express your interest. On the flip side, if that other thing happens that I just talked about, which doesn't happen as often, but it will do you and the folks involved and the time that you're spending a good service. Don't, as we call it today, don't ghost them, right? So you just walk out of the interview and then never to be heard from again. If you're not interested, whether in person or if you're not comfortable this way, even in your follow-up, let them know that you have decided that this is, you just don't think that this job is going to fit your skills, or that, you've just decided to pursue another opportunity. But decline and let someone know that professionalism, we want it to go both ways, right? So that's what you'd like to hear. Most importantly, though, you typically want the job, and make sure you express your interest and that that's what you want. I threw a couple little things in here really quickly, and I don't have time for questions, but knowing the world we're in today, phone and video interviewing are really key, and they're a lot harder to do, believe it or not, I think, than an in-person face-to-face interview. So if you're preparing on the phone, the plus is you can have all the stuff you want in front of you. You could have papers all over with like all your examples written out, so you can like, oh my gosh, what was it? Glance down. Oh yeah, that's what I want to talk about. But be prepared. Make sure that you're just as prepared to be on the phone as you are to be in person. Do that practice, because again, without that visual, sometimes how does your voice come across? How does your enthusiasm come across? How does your confidence come across on the phone? I always say, if you can, look in a mirror, smile at yourself, it'll come across in your voice. I know that sounds really silly, but it works. And you see stand up here, a lot of my recruiters will tell you, which I think sounds really funny too, but if you're not seeing you, sometimes standing versus sitting just allows for more of that enthusiasm and interest to come across, and just the way, and it's back to kind of that posture and nonverbals. Video interviews, similarly, I think can be really tough. So some tips really quickly for that: make sure that you test your technology, make sure it's going to work. Think about your surroundings. We do a lot of hiring with people who have roommates, or maybe, are living where they're able to put a camera, and especially in this situation may not be ideal. What's behind you? If you don't like what's behind you, put a backdrop like this one behind you, right? Get some of those backgrounds that you can add onto your Zoom or whatever, and make sure you have something behind you that's professional. But also, be thoughtful if you're going to be in an interview to maybe warn your roommates or others to stay out of the background, because we see that all the time, and it is distracting. And hopefully that's all it is. Lighting is important, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I also don't want it to look like I'm interviewing someone in the witness protection program. So make sure you're not like with so much light behind you, you can't see you. Again, want to focus on the content and not the distractions. So all of those things still come across. So no matter if it's a face-to-face, a video, a phone interview, when you get to that close and you leave it, make sure you leave them knowing that you're interested and you want the job. And then when you get past that, that's not where it ends. So I will tell you that if you send a follow-up note, and I know there will probably be some sticklers out there, old school, that would say it should be handwritten. I personally think an email is a better way to go. It gets to someone in a timely way. It's a more effective way. And especially in today's world, who knows where your mail is going? I think, but if you sent that email, you're still ahead of probably 90% of your peers who don't do that follow-up. So that quick follow-up after an interview to thank them for their time, to again reiterate your interest in the position, be able to point to some specifics as to why you're interested or why you're the best person. So make it personal. Don't just use a boilerplate and send the same thing to everybody. One or two things. Maybe there's something that you connected with that specific person on. You have a similar hobby, or you went to the same school or something like that. It could be as easy as that, but personalize it so they know you took the time to say thank you to them and that you're interested. No matter what happens, if someone said, we'll be back in touch within a week, if that week happens and you haven't heard back, absolutely follow up again. And it's okay to use the phone. So if you've tried email and maybe you're still waiting to hear, pick up the phone. I can't promise you that you're going to hear back from someone, but there's nothing wrong with showing that interest. Now, don't go to stalker mode, but be thoughtful about, this was the expectation set, and now I want to make sure they know I'm interested. So that quick follow-up really quickly. And then again, if you haven't heard, is absolutely okay. But no matter what happens, whether you get the job or not, appreciate the experience, because every time you do this interview, you're setting yourself up to be more successful the next time. You're learning more about yourself. You're learning more about different organizations and opportunities. And you never know the connections that can happen behind the scenes. Who's a recruiter here now that may work here later and it's somewhere you want to be, or we all know each other. So it's really important to appreciate the experience, whether you get the job or not. But and share that. And as part of that, staying connected, be polite, don't be pushy, but stay connected to those that you've had the chance and the opportunity, whether it's even just a LinkedIn connection, but following up, you never know when that next position or that next opportunity might float your way. And if you were a contender or maybe didn't get the job, you want to be front of mind the next time another opportunity comes in front. So I just rattled through a whole lot in a little period of time, and I'm sure I didn't cover everything. So Valerie, I don't know if there are any questions.
Yeah, really great information. Some of these I think you covered in the presentation, advice for discussing your weaknesses, some about appearance, a little bit more on appearance. When you're having a video interview as opposed to in person, obviously you want to dress professionally in both situations, but do you go as formal for the video? Do you go full suit, or is it maybe, a nice button down shirt? Is there a different rule?
So as I have learned, and if you saw me today, the plus to video is you only have to look good from the waist up, right? So you only have to fix yourself up halfway. I call it the video interview mullet, because you're just business on top, party on the bottom, all good. But I think as far as the part you see, again, it's your first impression, whether it's in person or not. And I think it ties to the role. So if it's a role that in person you would be in a jacket or a suit, then dress that level of professional. If it's a role where business casual or semi-casual is okay, dress that way, but keep it neat and appearance organized and all of that, no matter what. But yeah, I think you can never overdress for an interview, I believe. There's always a discomfort if you find that you've come underdressed. You don't really have that discomfort by having a jacket on and the person you're talking to does not, or something like that. So I hope that answers the question, but I would follow whatever the same guidance as if you were sitting down across from the person.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Social media has become incredibly prevalent. Do you have any advice in terms of social media accounts relating to pursuing your job? Is that something employers look at?
Hopefully they don't go out and Google you and look at that, but you always want to know that what is your presence? What is your brand? And so I always call it your personal brand. I have a whole workshop just on that alone, and social is a big part of it. So Google yourself and know what comes up. And then look at your profiles, what is available publicly and what does that say about you? So obviously, LinkedIn, while considered social, is really business. So make sure your LinkedIn profile shows you in your best business light. And whether that be the photo, LinkedIn isn't the place for the picture with your kids or your spouse or, your favorite place to have a beer. LinkedIn's for that more professional look versus maybe, Instagram. If your Instagram is public, then what's on it? If it's not, then keep it, make it private. Same with your Facebook or, any other of the accounts, understand what someone is going to see or what they're going to learn from you. So from that perspective, I think always be thinking of your personal brand, and social has become a big part of that, or even just online. It may not even be social media, but again, that's why I always recommend to occasionally Google yourself and make sure of what might be out there, what pops up based on things, especially as you go along in your career and more stuff is available and out there potentially. But from a social perspective, think about, would I want my mom to see that? I always put that in the back of my head. Or would I want this to end up, in the public? And I think you can balance it out pretty well.
Question about the resume and adding relevant experience. Is it appropriate to mention a mentorship if it's an informal mentorship? I'm thinking as the mentee,
Okay.
if you're looking for the experience piece.
Yeah, so I think it's difficult to put that on a resume. To me, that's something that, unless there's something of significance. So if you were selected for a mentor program, if it's something that you can kind of formalize, then I think it's an easier thing to put on a resume. The idea that you've reached out and found mentors and how they've helped you are more for you. And they may be something within an interview situation that you can refer to. I'm not sure that it's as easy to put that on a resume in an informal situation.
All right. And one last question that I've got here. If you're asked to prepare something in advance, like a SWOT or a 30, 60, 90, how deep do you go? How detailed?
Yeah, I think that preparation, if you're asked to provide a business plan of some kind, or some kind of analysis and preparation, think of your audience. So and what's going to be most important to them, and that's where that balance is. You want to be detailed enough to show that you've actually thought through it, you have a plan, you're prepared on how to action that plan, but you also want to be able to be concise enough that it doesn't show that you're just kind of putting words on paper. So I always balance it with, if I looked at it similar to resume, if I look at it and I don't know as much about you yet, is it going to give me enough information to say, this person looks to be capable, I want to learn more? Because I can always ask questions and follow up. But I do want to know enough to be able to differentiate you from someone else. So I know that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but it depends on what you're being asked for. So if it's a SWOT analysis, make sure you have at least a few bullets and a few examples under each of those sections, knowing that, opportunities and weaknesses might be the harder ones, but you want to be able to articulate that. It's harder with a business plan, like a 30, 60, 90-day plan of a new role or a new position or a new task, because that's going to depend on the scope of it. But I would say, I'm a big fan of the bullet point. I think the more you can get your answers into more of a soundbite that gives somebody the details, the results, the accomplishments, or the plan, the actions, the more they're going to be able to kind of follow that and read through it and make sense of it. And again, can follow up if they have follow-up questions to it.
All right. Well, I do want to say thank you. I think this was incredibly beneficial, Marie. Really appreciate you joining us.
Sure. Thank you. It was great to have you. And my contact info is here on this slide. If anyone wants to connect, I welcome it. And good luck to everyone.